I got very, very ill. And then somebody said to me, if you go to the Peru, someone is actually a very good friend of mine, again, didn't know Jesus. So he thought he was helping me, bless him. And I'm now sharing the gospel with him regular now. And he's coming around, praise God. But yeah, and he said to me, if you go to the Peruvian jungle, I've heard about this potion called ayahuasca. He said, if you go out there, he said, you'll get healing. So I managed to get myself together and I went out there 2 weeks after I heard about it and just flew there. And I knew I was just going along. I was like I'd broken like a gasket had gone in me. And there was oil coming in, there was water coming into the water. And knew I was finished. And it was a 50-50 thing whether I was going to come back or not. And I flew into Iquitos, a town in the jungle. And I eventually found a way to go to the Shipibo tribe on a boat with some other Westerners, 4 hours from Iquitos. And it was there that I'd spent 2 weeks in the jungle drinking ayahuasca. But things just got tremendously worse for me. I come from a family where there was a lot of spiritualism anyway, occult practices, so there was a lot of generational iniquity in my life. But what I was seeing in the jungle, you wouldn't wish anyone to see. I had enemies back then. I haven't now. We've only got one common enemy, as we know. But you wouldn't wish at the time. I wouldn't have wished anyone to go through what I was going through. I've gone through a lot of fights in my life, but this was the fight of my life. And there was a demon coming out of a guy in this ceremony, and it was attacking me. It was coming up out of him and it was attacking me, and I was rolling around on the floor, vomiting as it was going in through my mouth, and it was aligning with the demonic that was inside of me because you know, I'd been a Satan soldier for many many years, and didn't realise the amount of deliverance I needed because I didn't understand any of that at the time. But I fought this demon for 5 or 6 hours rolling around. There was grown men screaming in the jungle, screaming in that hut. Other Westerners. There was about 15 of us that were there on a retreat type of thing. And yeah, the next day, I just said, "There's no way I'm going back in now." And I tried to speak to other people to prevent them from going in, but they was just so frightened and wanted to be close to the witch doctors. And I couldn't trek away from. I couldn't. I was probably, I don't know how many miles away, 50 miles from any civilization, so I couldn't trek through the jungle as such. I didn't have any army um, experience and stuff like this. I probably would have come unstuck to a wild animal or something. And so I stayed there, but I didn't go back in for any more ceremonies. But I still felt the effects. I was 50 yards away in a hut on my own, and as they went back in, this demon started to manifest again through this guy, and there was men, women screaming again, and I was on my knees, and it was at that point that I kind of went into a default mode where I went to Sunday school a couple of times as a kid. That was it for the chocolate they gave you at the end, and I was on my knees on my own in this hut, and I was even being sick, vomiting because that's what it does. It makes you vomit ayahuasca, but I hadn't taken any more of it. I was just so frightened and in shock of what was going on, fear, and just my whole life. I just thought I must be cursed, just the man I'd become, where I was, and I cried out at that point. I was on my knees and I said, Jesus, if you're real, please help me. I'm so afraid, and and I was also praying for the other people, strangely enough, that were in the hut. I was saying, Jesus, please help us. And the next morning, went through the evening like that, and then and I felt comforted. I felt there was some kind of comfort there. And the next morning, one of the shamans came in and said to me, I was sitting there alone at the end of the table, said, "Was you praying last night?" He could never have known that. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Who was you praying to?" And I said, "Jesus." And he just walked away. So I think the Lord was at work there. I know that I felt comforted, but again, I didn't know Jesus. So I just cried out to him in selfish fear.